we got a conversation about the star. The star. Is there a star on top of that tree?
Yep. Is there?
Okay. Do you know where stars, the tradition of stars started? Martin Luther. He's the guy that put a star on the top of his tree. Actually had candles all over his tree. It's amazing it didn't burn down the entire place. Okay? And it was to depict when Jesus was born. And do you have stars on your trees? Most of us do. Many of us do. Some of us do. I have the most expensive Waterford crystal tree topping that's too heavy so I can never put it on. I would say one day I'm going to strengthen it up so that I can put that on there. But that day has not arrived. So the star was seen in the east, and it went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Now, scholars disagree about this star, what type of star. Some think it was a meteor, but that would have burned out long before the Magi arrived. Others thought it was a comet. Still others think it could have been a supernova, an exploding star. There's no record of a supernova occurring at that time. Astronomers are able to figure that out. Also, people studied the skies, and they would have made note of it. One of the major theories is that the return of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars all lining up. It was the result of them all lining up. This happens every 1,000 years. If you remember when the moon is in the 7th hour and Jupiter aligns with Mars.
Age of Aquarius.
Age of Aquarius. Okay. Did you see Jupiter a few months ago? It's pretty bright. Okay. So if you stood in the same place, you would see it move. Okay, that's the argument that people are trying to make. Here's what happens. People try to naturalize the miraculous. Now, God does use the natural world. But people try to de-miracleize the spiritual events of the Bible. It's a star that moved and eventually stood over where the child lay. And I want you to realize that the people who this star was recognized by were men who studied the stars. These guys, the Magi, are stargazers. This was a science back in the day. The way you and I have astronomers in our lives, realized that there was no electricity, so when it was nighttime, the sky lit up and you could see things. If you've ever been a city boy like me and then went out and stayed at my friend's house in Nantucket, and oh my gosh, you can see, things that I'd never seen before, only on pictures. What do you call that big mess?
Milky Way.
Yeah. It's pretty cool to see that, really. And so they knew the stars. And so you and I, the naked eye, can see about 4,000 stars. There are at least 110 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, and there are estimated to be 100 billion galaxies. So there's a lot of stars. Get a load of this. God knows them by name. Pretty amazing. So, a lot of people follow the stars for guidance. Astrology. This was I grew up in Los Angeles, right? And this was a great way to find out who I would be dating and who I would not be dating. If she was into my sign, that was a sign that this was not the kind of girl that I wanted to be with. Okay? I wasn't interested in knowing what my sign was. And astrology is the belief that the movement of the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars have an effect on our personality. And you go, oh yeah, right. Well, the police and the emergency room will tell you on a full moon there's way more activity than on a regular 30 days. Teachers notice that too? Yeah. So there is something to the Midian lines of life. I don't know. So, astrology makes predictions about the future events. And up until the 17th century, astrology and astronomy were one and the same. Okay, they believed that the heavens and the earth were connected, and that brings us to the star. But this is a different star because it didn't belong. Now, I want you to realize something. Most of the deported Jews from Jerusalem to Babylon, and then the Persians took them over, and most of them stayed in Babylon. Do you know that they had some of the best real estate in Babylon? It was given to them. They were by a river. It was a good place. These were the smartest Jews, and most of them stayed. Some went back to rebuild the wall and rebuild Jerusalem, but most of them stayed. And so these guys were part of the Persian Empire, and then, they infiltrated into, the societies as it was taken over by Alexander the Great. And, so what you have here is really smart Jewish people who are aware of their religion. There's two texts. You have the Babylonian text and you have the New Jerusalem text. The New Jerusalem text was written by the B team, intelligence-wise. The Babylonian text was written by the smart Jews that were deported. So the smart Jews are reading the signs of their religion. And they're left over from Daniel's time, and they inform the learned men of the prophecy the God of the universe will be coming to earth. So when you hear the news, the God of the universe is coming to earth, this is an invitation for you and I to maybe investigate. Some things are worth investigating. A man asked his wife, hey, do you mind if I go on a fishing trip with my boss? We're going to go for a week, and make sure you pack my blue pajamas. She said, no problem. So he goes on his fishing trip and comes back. Oh, we caught walleye. Told her all about the trip. And he says, but you forgot to pack my blue pajamas. And she said, no, I didn't. I put them in your fishing tackle box. Some investigators are good. In Acts, the Bereans searched the scriptures to see if these things were so. Such a good verse. Search the scripture to see if these things are so. Sometimes we don't understand and we cross our arms and we distance ourselves from God. Well, no, just dive a little deeper. Do a little investigation. And what you learn is this verse connects to that verse, which explains the other verse, which is culminating in still another verse, and it all lines up perfectly. That happens so often. Almost every month I learn something I didn't know before. Okay? So, I like to think I know things. I've read the Bible enough times. I'm still learning and growing and transforming. And I think that this is the season for you and I to be looking for God. Okay? Daniel's unique in that it tells precisely when Jesus was coming to earth and when the end times are going to happen. I mean, it gives you like timelines. And he was accurate about when Jesus came. And I have a feeling he's probably going to be accurate about when the end times happen. I don't know if you remember, people are always trying to predict the end times. Back in 1988, somebody wrote a book about the 88 reasons why Jesus is coming back in 1988. It's a big seller. Jesus didn't come back in 1988. He wrote another book in 1989, and nobody bought that one. Okay? He fooled us once. Okay? Speaking of the second coming, the constellation of Virgo, the sign of the woman, is supposed to meet Leo. Jesus is the Lion of Judah. And this will be in conjunction for the first time in 7,000 years. This happened in 2017. And so in my office, I had people coming in. Pastor, do you know about Virgo and Leo? I'm like, oh, tell me. And so they would tell me. And the end times are going to happen. And this is when it's going to, and you need to tell the congregation. I'm like, well, how come none of the other pastors are talking about it? How come it's just you and some random person coming in telling me about the end times and nobody else is? But I went ahead and said, listen, friends, somebody has pointed out Virgo and Leo are lining up, and this takes place once every 7,000 years, and a lot of people think this is when the rapture is going to happen, and what if it's true? Are you ready? Okay. Happened to me in 2009 also. Somebody walked into my office, the moon, the blood moon, and this moon, and that moon are all going to line up. End times. How come you're not telling the pastor? Your congregation? I'm like, I don't know. So we're supposed to be preparing for others. We're supposed to be preparing others for Christ's return. All right? And this doesn't mean stargazing for dates. This means investing in God's activity to prepare ourselves and the world for Christ's return. Wouldn't it be amazing to live in such a way that whatever day it happens, I'm ready. And not only am I ready, I got everybody else around me ready. This is very important. So I'm just going to lean on you a little bit. Do you tell the people in your sphere of influence about the Lord? One person here sent out a whole bunch of letters to all of their family members explaining the end times, explaining the information, and just said, I wanted you to know, just in case I won't be around to help you out when I'm gone. Okay? Another friend of mine is actually creating a system for people left behind who will then give their lives to Jesus, and then they'll be able to get connected and team up against evil in the end times. Some people are really taking it seriously, okay? And I think sometimes we have to ask, am I on my time zone or God's time zone? I found this fascinating, the daylight savings. I still haven't adjusted a couple of months later, I got to be honest. But when the railroad came, they'd say, okay, we're going to be arriving in your town at noon. But the problem was every town had their own noon, because noon in Indiana, South Bend, Indiana, was, 12:07 at the next town over and 12:15 at the next town over. And so suddenly when the brand new trains in the 1800s are showing up, nobody could get the time right. So the railroads set the different time zones. West Coast, Mountain Time, okay, Central Time, Eastern Time. Did you know that? The railroads. All right? It's almost like the railroads learned firsthand how impractical it is for people to have their own time zones. And I feel like that's what a lot of folks have right now, their own spiritual time zones. And they're not coordinating them with God's time. Okay? We're just living according to how we feel. A guy comes in for marriage counseling, and I go, well, tell me about your, relationship with Jesus. Oh, I worship Jesus in my own way. I'm like, well, but that he Is it the way he wants to be worshiped, or is that your way that you choose to worship? There's a big difference. What you might deem as good enough for him, he might not. Ask Cain about what's good enough, because his offering wasn't good enough. So, something to think about. So here in our passage, the wise men are following a star. It's risen in the east. Now, I want you to know something. The wise man's focus was not on the star. It was on the purpose of the star. The king of the universe was going to be born. Okay? They call it his star. You can trust the man with the star, right? Texaco? All right. Here we go. They're not interested in an astrological anomaly. They want to worship the God of the heavens. And the Lord Jesus has 256 names. And why so many names? Because it's infinitely beyond what we could express. We're just trying to create descriptions of who God is in his magnificence. But one of the names comes from Numbers 24:17. A star will come out of Jacob. Now we're zeroing in. Okay? And they also made another observation. Okay? Scholars explain the Greek word star can also mean radiance. So now you're looking at something unique. The radiance of God. This is, I don't know. This is a big deal. Because Jesus radiates in your heart. Jesus radiates in our lives. You know, remember in Ezekiel 11:23, the glory of the Lord went up from within the city and stopped above the mountain east of it, and the glory of the Lord moved. Now, this is in Ezekiel 33. So, what had happened in Ezekiel's time is the glory moved to the temple, then it lifted up, and it moved to the top of the mountain, and it never came back. And the priests were still doing all of their spiritual mojo, and God had left the building. And suddenly you're like, well, I don't want to have an irrelevant faith. I don't want to have a Christianity that has no value. Okay? It's not mentioned again until Luke says, an angel of the Lord appeared to the shepherds, and the glory of the Lord shone around them. You see, the star represents the return of the glory of God to Israel. It is. So, in Ezekiel, okay, was that 5-something BC? Boom. Jesus shows up, 33 AD, or 0 BC, give or take a year. All right? So the star was a physical manifestation of the glory of God, and it's in the form of a supernatural radiance. So now we're starting to realize that the star is not an astronomical experience. It's a miraculous, supernatural star come from heaven to earth, shining over Jesus. And you know, you shouldn't get so excited about it because, I mean, our whole religion is supernatural. Christianity is supernatural. It's about God interrupting our lives. And you know, the spiritual radiance, it was, you know, a pillar of fire by night for Moses. In Solomon's temple, it showed up at Jesus' birth. Okay, at this Jesus transformation and his ascension, we see a radiance happening. So it's a normal thing for God to show up with his radiance. And this is where the star gets personal. In Daniel 12:3, it says, those who are wise will shine like stars and lead people to God. suddenly you and I have a little bit of his radiance. You know, I grew up in a tough neighborhood. And so smiling was a great way to get beat up. So you had to put on the scowl just to let people know, don't mess with me. And the problem is the scowl becomes your persona. It becomes your way of doing life. I was working out with my friend the other day, and he goes, yeah, one of my relatives was going into Disney, and he almost got in a fight with the guy at the gate before he got in. Okay? He's a guy that grew up in the tough streets of Chicago, and he never grew out of the scowl. Never grew out of the street mentality. Ready to fight the folks at Disney. Maybe you could understand that, I don't know, but here's the deal. You and I are supposed to be radiant. People should feel welcomed into your presence. You should have a countenance that means you're safe, you're approachable, that you're distributing something positive. And so I've had to remind myself, turn that frown upside down. Okay? Am I generating William or am I generating Jesus? Sometimes you just got to give yourself that talking to. Or if you have a good friend who comes along and says, you got a bad look on your face and you're at the front door, maybe you should change things, okay? I don't know. I give myself that talk. If somebody else gives you that talk, you should thank them, all right? And, it's his light that's shining through us. It's his radiance, not our own. I know I've told you before about the Hindu trader who met a missionary, and he goes, what is it about what do you put on your face to make it shine? He goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't put anything on my face. And he gets frustrated. Yes, you do. All of you, those Christians, you who believe in Jesus, you have it. I've seen that face in Agra and Surat and even in the city of Bombay. And the missionary knew, it's not something that we put on our face. It's something that comes out from within us. So what's coming out from within you? My Bible reading yesterday, it was about when Jesus wants to go through Samaria and the Samaritans won't let him. And so James and John, should we call down fire from heaven and burn them up? Okay. Jesus says, you do not know what spirit you are of. And I think sometimes it's important that you and I are shining the right light, extending the right amount of patience, trying to understand why that person said that, where they're coming from. Most people are fighting a battle that you know nothing about. And so we need to go a little bit slower when we're trying to help these people. And that's one of the most powerful ways for you and I to reflect God's light. Moses met with God face to face, and you know what happened to him, right? His face would shine. And it's supposed to make a difference. There's nothing worse than having a devotion and sweet fellowship with the Lord and learning new biblical insights and then getting up and immediately getting into an argument with somebody or having a bad attitude or mismanaging something. It happens, but it should happen a lot less when you're letting the Word of God change you. And you and I, we live in a world where there's a lot of hopelessness, a lot of despair, a lot of bitterness, a lot of violence, a lot of selfishness. And we shine because the love of Jesus and His gentleness and His self-sacrifice are what we're releasing, what we're distributing. We should be changing the atmosphere at home, at work, in our social circles, when you have your Christmas events. On Sunday, we get done with the Bethlehem experience. Wow. Okay, just wow in so many ways. When you're on a spiritual high, I preach mighty God, and then I get attacked about something. small. And 3 people are all upset and in my face. And it just caught me off guard. I'm like, huh? Well, I was so much over here. What's down? Same thing happened at the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus is with Moses and Elijah. God spoke to them. He's radiating, and he comes down to an argument about healing somebody. And the religious leaders are beating up on the disciples. And the disciples couldn't pull it off because it was a serious demon. And, it's just such a mountaintop experience down into the pits. And you have to be ready to handle those moments correctly. And the way to handle them correctly is to always stay connected to your life source. And that is Jesus Christ. Let your light shine so that others will see your good works and bring glory to your Lord. Your good works are not to get you into heaven. Your good works are to show people the difference life with God makes and life without God. That's what your good works do. The good works don't get you into heaven. Jesus' good work gets you into heaven. We just do good works to tell everybody about Jesus' good work. Okay? I don't want you to think you can put a star on your tree and think you've done your duty. Okay? And we're called to open people's eyes and turn them from darkness to light, and to help them see their need for Christ and His forgiveness and His power. And did you realize that the Bible doesn't say how many wise men there were? We say there's 3 because 3 gifts were given, but could have been more than 3. You have to know this. There were no wise men at the stable. They were late to the party. And so we usually take Matthew 1 and Matthew 2 and put them together. But Jesus had become a toddler by the time these guys showed up. And were they late? Or were they just on time, God's time? Because Herod was about to kill them. They needed to go to Egypt. And you know what happens? They get funds to survive life moving to Egypt. The right time, God shows up. Isn't it exciting? I don't think you're excited enough about this. Okay, I get excited about it. By the way, you know how we said Jesus never visited a big city in my spiel at the Bethlehem experience? Well, the guy that wrote that, Jesus went to Cairo. It's a big city. And Jesus was in Jerusalem. It's a big city. So I wanted to write that guy a note and let him know that his information was incorrect. Then I found out he's dead a long time ago, so I couldn't correct him. The wise men's journey was 800 miles. It would have taken them 3 months. It's not a safe journey. They probably had an entourage of military help, military escort. And so these distinguished men with armed soldiers come to the gates of Jerusalem saying, we're looking for the child who was born King of the Jews. Okay? We've seen his star in the east and we've come to worship him. And this is what is striking. Okay? They're asking for directions, even though they're led by a star. So, you can tell the women were missing from the event because the ladies would have said, guys, okay. Or maybe God moved the star from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. This is a big, important insight. Bethlehem's 10 miles away. But Jerusalem, this is where, this is the seat of the spiritual life. Okay? I think God wanted to get the message out in Jerusalem. Who made the star? God. Why is he guiding the star to Jerusalem? Because he has a purpose in mind. You have to understand, if the shepherds had said, we've heard the angels, they would have been laughed at and dismissed by the religious crowd. Okay, shepherds were not able, if they saw murder, their testimony was not allowed in court. That's how bad they were. That's how low they were on the social scale. Kind of powerful, isn't it? But God doesn't come to, the politicians and the religious leaders. And why would God take the star to Bethlehem? Well, because the God who had peasants raising his son, who had his son born in a barn, who has them running for their lives from Herod, who has them live in a little redneck town in Galilee, he has a fondness for the disenfranchised. You and I should never look down on the poor. We should never get an attitude and say, get a job. We should always realize that, you know what? God cares about those who've been crushed by life. God has opinions of compassion about those who failed and haven't been able to make ends meet. God wants you and me to make sure that we're blessing and empowering and caring for those who are beneath us on the economic scale. Okay? And it says in 1 Corinthians, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of the world that are despised to nullify the things that, we hold valuable. And I want you to notice that when the angels appear to the shepherds, they go and they check it out. The wise men hear about the star, they go and they check it out. Okay? When they stop at Jerusalem and tell the religious leaders about it, they don't go and check it out. This is very telling. Herod went and checked it out. Herod believes these guys, but the religious leaders who did their homework to say that God, the baby's going to come from Bethlehem, they don't check it out. And were they too busy? I don't know. Maybe it didn't fit into their theology. Maybe you get to a spot where you're no longer expecting anything from God. Now, friends, this is a little bit painful, but sometimes we were hoping for something and it didn't show up, and so we get a little bit of an attitude with God. And I still believe in God, but me and him have a personal issue. I'll let him take me to heaven, but when I get there, I have some questions and I'm going to demand him to answer. Do you know how many times I've heard that? I always remind people, in that day you will ask me nothing, Jesus says. So, sometimes we're not expecting God to show up because he didn't show up before. And like I said Sunday, how you wait is going to determine what you experience. Maybe he didn't answer this prayer, but I'm going to just stay close to him so he can answer other prayers. Wouldn't it be cool if he used you to set up the next Dwight L. Moody, the next Billy Graham, the next big move in somebody's life? What if you were the catalyst to bring somebody else to Jesus you got to be the one with the assist, all right? Well, Jerusalem, it's important. It's where God sent Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. It's where David set up his throne. It's where Jesus would die for the sins of humanity, okay, and rise from the dead. It's the location Jesus is coming back to. When we were in Jerusalem, the Muslims put a whole bunch of graves in front of the gate that is where Jesus is supposed to come through, because they want to stop Jesus from coming through. So they're going to put a bunch of dead people there so Jesus can't. And you're like, okay, you don't understand. Jesus is God. And he's the kind of guy that will cause all of those people in the tombs to rise up and get out of my way. It's so funny that we sometimes put our human lens on things. Jerusalem's important to God. That's why the wise men went there. God wanted them to understand the Messiah is coming. read your scriptures, get ready for my movement. And I guess Christmas is God's invitation to get ready for a fresh movement. And I'm going to ask, and I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad, but I got to get the Christmas Eve sermon done, but I got 2 more sermons before that one, and then we just got done with the Bethlehem experience, and I think I got my wife's last present yesterday, but there's one more thing I'm trying to pick up, and I've got to go see a relative when we're done with Legacy, and and ladies who are putting the meal together, you got to get your food and the table set, and don't forget to get, you know what I'm saying? We got a lot of stuff to do. But is there any spiritual something on your agenda also? Now, no one's supposed to feel bad, but maybe this is an invite for all of us to add that spiritual something. And you might say, Lord, I don't have a spiritual something in mind, but I'd like to have a fresh encounter with you. So how can I set that up? Maybe I need to do a devotion. Maybe I need to ask for something. I think I'm due for you to do a fresh arrival. Maybe it's time for me to forgive somebody or adjust or start investing. I don't know. I mean investing in someone's life, not the stock market, by the way. Okay. Something between you and God this Christmas. What's today? December 12th. We got the 12 days of Christmas coming up. Maybe this is your invite to get ready for Jesus' arrival. What are you going to do with the news, the Christmas news? The shepherds told everybody. Would you be willing to waste your time on a sinful co-worker who cusses all the time, on a relative who's been nasty to you in the past? Invite somebody to church who you think will disdain the gesture. Would you be willing to spend time inviting somebody who does drugs or spends too much time at the bar or is promiscuous? Would you be willing to be God's ambassador to that person that doesn't fit into your lifestyle or your preferences or your personality? Every now and then, I got one of those people in the church that will drag in the individual that oh. But that's exactly who Jesus wants dragged into his house on Christmas Eve. And so maybe that's what you and I should first say. Lord, who can I bring? Lord, how can you move? Lord, is there anything that I can open up from Jesus to put into motion? Otherwise, it's going to be a same old another Christmas. And I think we've had enough of those. Okay? Enough of those. I think it's time for you and I to let go of some bitterness or stop fearing or releasing a grudge. Or let's be done with the political flag and just start flying the Jesus flag. All right? Well, this one preacher's on an airplane and he's working on his sermon, and the guy next to him goes, what's going on? He goes, I'm a preacher, I'm working on my sermon. And the guy goes, when it comes to religion, I don't care too much about getting involved. For me, it's the golden rule, do unto others, should do unto you. That's about all I do with religion. Pastor says, really, what do you do for a living? He goes, I'm an astrophysicist. He goes, so you're into the science of the stars. Yeah, you could say that. He goes, well, I don't really concern myself with science of the stars too much. For me, don't let it get that complicated. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder where you are. There's a lot more to the stars than twinkle, twinkle. For a Christian, you could go, wow, look at the grandeur of God. But so many people are looking out that we forget to look in. And Jesus came to drop anchor in you, to transform the core of you, to create His life through His Spirit, so His agenda, which is His love, will pour through your life. And that is why Jesus came, and that's the star that we're following and the star we're supposed to be radiating. Amen.